She said it loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. Security. There's a teenager wandering around the executive floor. Maren Voss was 41 years old, head of acquisitions at Caldwell Financial, wearing a blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she was pointing at a girl who hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't even looked up from the worn canvas tote bag she was adjusting on her shoulder. The girl was 17, small, mixed race with close-cropped natural hair and eyes that didn't register panic the way most teenagers' eyes do when an adult in authority raises their voice. She wore a faded green hoodie, jeans with a small tear at the left knee, and sneakers that had been white once, maybe 2 years ago. Her name was Priya Ose Bonsu, and she was there to save a company she didn't own yet. Here's what you need to know before I go any further. Caldwell Financial was 3 days from collapse, not the kind of polite managed collapse that gets dressed up in press releases about restructuring and strategic pivots. The real kind. The kind where the phones stop ringing because everyone already knows, and the last few people still showing up to work do so because they haven't figured out where else to go. The collapse had a name. It was called the Harman Group. The Harman Group was a Singapore-based investment consortium, and 6 months ago they had been on the verge of injecting $40 million into Caldwell Financial. The deal would have cleared the debt, funded the expansion, and bought another decade of life for a company that had been quietly dying for 3 years. Then the deal fell apart. Nobody at Caldwell ever fully understood why. The Harman Group's lead negotiator, a man named Benson Lau, had sent a 2-sentence email, respectfully withdrawing, no further explanation. $40 million, 2 sentences, gone. Since then, Caldwell's CEO, a man named Stuart Caldwell, 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had a portrait of himself in the conference room, had been trying everything. New investors, new pitches, new consultants who charged new fees and delivered the same old nothing. 3 days ago, Stuart had received a message. Not an email, not a call from an assistant. A handwritten note, left at the front desk, addressed to him directly. It read, "I believe I can help facilitate a second conversation with the Harman Group. I'd like to meet at your earliest convenience." The note was signed, Priya Ose Bonsu. Stuart had stared at the name for a long time. Then he'd asked his assistant to find out who she was. His assistant came back 10 minutes later, looking slightly confused. "She's a high school student, sir. Attends Jefferson Preparatory in Bryn Mawr. She's 17. Stuart had read the note again. He'd been in business for 40 years. He had learned, sometimes the hard way, not to ignore a door just because it was small. He told his assistant to schedule the meeting. Which is how Priya Ose Bonsu ended up on the 31st floor of the Caldwell Financial Building on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in the lobby, while Maren Voss pointed at her and called for security. Priya still hadn't moved. A security guard appeared from around the corner, wide-shouldered, expression professional. He looked at Priya, then at Maren, then at the badge hanging around Priya's neck. The visitor badge reception had given her 11 minutes ago. "She has a badge," the guard said. Maren's chin lifted. "That doesn't mean she belongs up here. Who let her in?" Mr. Caldwell's office approved the visit. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind that happens when a person who was very sure of something is suddenly forced to recalibrate. Maren looked at Priya. Priya looked back, not with defiance, not with the hot-faced embarrassment that most 17-year-olds would bring to a moment like this, just with a kind of quiet patience, like she'd been here before. Not in this building, in this moment. She had. "I'm here to see Mr. Caldwell," Priya said. Her voice was calm, measured, slightly low for her age. She walked past Maren without another word. Stuart Caldwell's office had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Philadelphia's financial district. He stood when Priya entered, which surprised her, though she didn't show it. He was taller in person than she'd expected. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Miss Ose Bonsu, thank you for making time," she said. She sat down, set the canvas tote on her lap, and folded her hands on top of it. Stuart studied her the way people study something that doesn't quite fit the category they've prepared for it. A teenager, in a hoodie, in his office. Your note said you could help with the Harmon Group, he said. I can. How does a 17-year-old know the Harmon Group? Pre reached into the tote and set a manila folder on the desk. Stuart opened it. Inside was a single printed sheet, a detailed breakdown of the Caldwell-Harmon negotiation from 6 months ago, including a line item that nobody at Caldwell had ever identified as the problem. He read it twice. Where did you get this? I put it together, she said. From public filings, Harmon Group's published statements, a Singaporean business journal interview with Benson Lau from March, and a few conversations I had with people I know. Stuart set the paper down carefully. What conversations? My father does business in Singapore. He introduced me to someone on Lau's team 2 years ago. We've stayed in touch. There was a pause. Your father, Stuart said slowly. Winston Osei Bonsu, Priya said. He doesn't involve himself in my work, this is mine. Stuart leaned back. He was looking at her differently now. Not the way Mandarin had looked at her. Not the up-and-down appraisal of someone deciding whether you belong. He was looking at her the way people look when they're doing rapid, urgent math. What's your ask? He said. I don't have one. I'm here because I think this deal matters, and I think I can help fix what broke. Stuart was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What broke? Priya opened the folder again and pointed to a single paragraph. The draft contract used the phrase binding arbitration in the event of dispute, under U.S. jurisdiction. In Singapore, especially with investors who have ties to the Harmon family's history with American courts in 2019, that phrase doesn't read as standard legal boilerplate. She paused. It reads as a threat. Stuart stared at the paragraph. Nobody caught that, he said. It wasn't a question. Nobody who knew what it would mean to the other side was in the room, she said. Stuart closed the folder. He looked at this 17-year-old girl in a faded hoodie sitting across from the desk where he had made, and lost, and remade his career 3 times over. He said, I have a call with my legal team in an hour. Would you be willing to sit in? Priya said, yes. She was not prepared for what happened next. Not because she didn't know the material. She knew every page of it. But because Stuart's legal team consisted of 4 people, all of them adults, all of them credentialed, and when she walked into that conference room, every single one of them did the same thing. They looked at Stuart as if to ask whether this was a joke. Stuart said, Miss Osei Bonsu identified a clause I'd like your team to review. He set a copy of the paragraph in front of them. The senior attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, 55, steel-framed glasses, the kind of legal experience that lives in his posture, read it in 30 seconds. This is a standard arbitration clause, he said. It is, Priya said. In an American context. Gerald looked at her. Actually looked, for the first time since she'd entered the room. The Harmon Group's founding family lost a significant asset in a U.S. arbitration proceeding in 2019, Priya said. A Malaysian real estate holding. It was not a fair process by most measures, and Benson Lau was the junior associate who had to deliver the news to the family. He's been chairman for 2 years, he doesn't forget. Silence. You can verify it, Priya said. The case is public record, Harmon v. Pacific Meridian Holdings, filed in the Southern District. Gerald was already typing on his laptop. He found it in 40 seconds. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Priya sat at the end of the table and answered every question that came at her, not with the defensive precision of someone proving themselves, but with the straightforward patience of someone who had simply done the work. She referenced 3 separate sources in their original languages, one in Mandarin, one in Malay, one in formal Singaporean English that carried specific tonal weight she took the time to explain. By the end of the meeting, Gerald Fitch had stopped looking at Stuart for guidance. He was looking at Priya. Stuart walked her to the elevator himself. Where did you learn Mandarin? He asked. My grandmother, Priya said. She came from Guangzhou. She taught me in exchange for me teaching her how to use email. Stuart smiled. It was small and genuine. I'll reach out to Benson Lau's office this week, he said. With the revised language. I already have, Priya said. Stuart blinked. I sent a preliminary note yesterday on my own behalf just to test the water. He responded this morning. She handed him her phone. There was an email, 2 sentences in English. We are open to a second conversation. Please advise on timing. The elevator doors opened. Priya stepped in, adjusted the canvas tote on her shoulder. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Caldwell, she said. The doors closed. Stuart stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he turned around and walked back to his office. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. Find out everything you can about Winston Osai-Bonsu, he said, and his daughter. There is something most people don't know about Priya Osai-Bonsu, something she had never volunteered and that no one at Caldwell Financial had thought to ask. When she was 8 years old, she sat at a kitchen table in a house in West Philadelphia. Not the big house they lived in now, the first house, the one with the drafty windows and the radiator that clanked all winter, and she watched her father lose everything. Winston Osai-Bonsu was 44 at the time. He had built a small import consulting firm from nothing over 15 years, and in the span of 6 months, a contract dispute with a larger company had reduced it to paperwork and debt. He sat at that kitchen table for 3 days straight, surrounded by folders, reading and rereading the documents, saying nothing. On the 4th day, Priya climbed up into the chair across from him, pulled a folder toward herself, and said, "Can I look?" Winston had looked at his 8-year-old daughter for a long moment. Then he said, "You can look." She didn't understand most of it, but she understood some. She asked questions. Winston answered them. It became a habit. Every evening for the next year while Winston rebuilt, slowly, carefully, one relationship at a time, Priya sat at that table and asked questions about business, about contracts, about why people said one thing and meant another, about how trust worked between people who came from different places and carried different histories. Winston answered every question. Not the way adults answer children, which is to say simplified and a little condescending. He answered them the way you answer someone you respect. By the time she was 12, Priya could read a contract addendum and identify the pressure points before most law students could. By the time she was 15, she had accompanied her father to 3 international business meetings, always sitting quietly at the side of the room, always watching, always remembering. By 17, she had 2 things that no one looking at her would have guessed: a contact list that reached Singapore and a mind that had been trained, without a classroom or credential, in the specific art of understanding how different people build and break trust. She had never told anyone at Jefferson Preparatory, not because she was hiding it, because no one had ever thought to ask. Every morning on the school bus, a girl named Diana, popular in the specific, effortless way that some teenagers are, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously doubted, would look at Priya's worn sneakers and smile the automatic smile that people offer when they've already categorized someone. Priya would look out the window and think about Singapore. News travels fast in a building full of people whose main currency is information. By Wednesday afternoon, everyone at Caldwell Financial knew that Stuart had spent 2 hours with a teenager in a hoodie, that the legal team had apparently taken her seriously, and that something was happening with the Harmon Group, though nobody knew exactly what. The reactions were predictable. Mandarin Voss stopped by Gerald Fitch's office. "Please tell me this isn't what I'm hearing," she said. Gerald looked up from his computer. "What are you hearing?" Mandarin set her hand on the doorframe. "That we're outsourcing strategy to a child." Gerald paused. "She's not a child. She's 17. She identified a jurisdictional sensitivity our entire legal team missed over 6 months." Marin's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. She left without another word. A junior associate in the bullpen said to the person next to him, "What's next? We hire her for the board." The person next to him didn't laugh. Stuart's assistant overheard 2 vice presidents talking in the kitchen. One of them said, "It's a PR thing. He's going to announce some kind of youth mentorship initiative." The other one nodded, like that was the only explanation that made sense. Nobody asked what Priya actually knew. Nobody asked where she'd learned it. They had looked at the green hoodie and the torn jeans and the worn sneakers, and they had decided, completely and efficiently, the way people always decide about someone they've already filed into the wrong drawer. The following Monday, Benson Lau's office confirmed a video call. Stuart asked Priya to be present. She showed up 10 minutes early, same hoodie, same tote bag, same worn sneakers, because nobody had told her to wear anything else, and it hadn't occurred to her to change. She knew the material. She had reread every document 3 times over the weekend. She had reviewed her notes on Benson Lau's communication style, formal, indirect, consensus-oriented, deeply attuned to the weight of unspoken meaning. She was ready. Then Maren Voss appeared in the conference room doorway. Stuart. Her tone was the kind that isn't asking. A word? They stepped into the hallway. Priya could see them through the glass partition. She couldn't hear the words, but she had spent 9 years watching people negotiate across cultural and linguistic distances. She could read posture. She could read the set of a jaw, the angle of a shoulder, the moment a person shifts their weight backward because they're about to say something they've already committed to. Maren was committed. When Stuart came back in, his expression was careful, controlled. The expression of a man who has made a compromise he isn't entirely at peace with. "I've asked Gerald to take point on the call," he said. "I'd like you to stay on as a resource. If we hit a moment where your insight would help, I'll bring you in." He held her gaze for a beat. He was not a man who apologized easily, but something in the way he said it carried the weight of one. Priya nodded, understood. She sat to the side of the conference table, slightly out of frame. The call began. Benson Lau was 51, trim, careful in the way that highly experienced negotiators are careful. Every word chosen like it cost something. Gerald led the Caldwell side with the revised contract language, professional and precise. And for the first 20 minutes, the call moved smoothly. Then Gerald made a proposal, direct. American style. Clear terms, specific timeline, 3 bullet points. There was a pause on the other side of the call. Benson Lau's expression didn't shift. But Priya had read his March interview twice. She had read the profile piece from a Singaporean financial magazine. She knew the pause. Gerald read it as thoughtful consideration. It wasn't. Priya leaned forward very slightly and caught Stuart's eye. Stuart looked at her. She shook her head once, barely perceptible, small and precise, the kind of signal that only lands if the person receiving it is paying attention. Stuart was paying attention. He leaned forward, gently cut across Gerald's follow-up, and said, "Perhaps this is a conversation better continued over a longer timeline. We want to make sure both sides have the room they need to bring this to their respective teams." The pause on the other side of the call broke. Benson Lau's posture, even through a screen, settled slightly. He nodded once. He said, "We appreciate that perspective." The call ended 40 minutes later with an agreement to reconvene in 2 weeks. Gerald closed his laptop. Good meeting. Stuart said nothing. He was looking at Priya. She was already packing the folder back into the canvas tote. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, "not for the room, just for him." When he paused after Gerald's proposal, that wasn't consideration, that was the beginning of a no. In his profile piece, he described his decision-making style as collective and deliberate. A 3-bullet-point timeline lands like an ultimatum to him. She paused. "You caught it. You walked it back well." Stuart was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saw that in 2 seconds. I've been reading him for 3 days," she said, which was not modesty. It was just accurate. Maren Voss had watched the last 15 minutes of the call through the glass partition. Nobody had invited her. Nobody had asked her to leave. She stood there with her arms folded, face unreadable, watching a 17-year-old girl in a green hoodie redirect a $40 million negotiation with a single look. She walked away before anyone could see her expression change. Stuart found Priya in the lobby an hour later. She was sitting on a bench near the entrance, waiting for her bus, earbuds in, reading something on her phone. He sat down next to her. She pulled one earbud out. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Why did you come here? You could have gone anywhere with this. Your father has connections. You could have leveraged this 100 different ways." Priya was quiet for a moment. "My father lost his company when I was 8, she said. "It didn't have to happen. There was a clause in a contract that nobody caught, and it cost him 3 years." She looked at the lobby doors. "When I read your situation, I recognized the shape of it. I thought someone should say something." Stuart looked at the lobby doors too. "I want to offer you a formal consulting engagement," he said, "compensated. We would work within whatever constraints make sense given your school schedule." He paused. "If you're interested?" Priya was quiet. "There will be pushback," Stuart said. "Not a warning. Just information." "I know," she said. "I'll handle it." She looked at him, really looked. "The way you look at someone when you're deciding whether they mean it." She thought about her father at the kitchen table. She thought about the folder she had pulled toward herself when she was 8 years old and said, "Can I look?" She thought about all the meetings she had sat beside and behind and at the edge of, watching, waiting, building something that nobody had ever thought to name. "Okay," she said. She put the earbud back in. The bus wasn't coming for 6 minutes. That evening, Priya sat at the kitchen table in the big house. The house they lived in now, the one Winston had rebuilt for them, slowly and carefully over 15 years, and she called her father. Winston's Osei Bonsu answered on the second ring. He was in Atlanta for meetings. His voice was tired in the way it always was at the end of a long travel day, slightly rough at the edges, warmer than usual. "How did it go?" he asked. He knew she'd sent the note. He hadn't tried to involve himself, hadn't offered to call in a favor or open a door. That was their agreement, had been since she was 14 and told him she needed to find out what she was on her own. "He offered me a consulting contract," Priya said. Winston was quiet for a moment. "Paid?" he asked. "Yes." Another quiet. Then he said, "They're lucky you walked through that door." Priya smiled. The kind of smile that starts somewhere behind the eyes before it reaches the mouth. "I caught something in the call today," she said. A pause. "Gerald didn't see it, but Stuart did once I flagged it." "What kind of pause?" she told him. Winston listened without interrupting, the way he had always listened. Completely, with the attention of someone who understood that details mattered, that the space between words was where the real negotiation lived. When she finished, he said, "Your grandmother used to say that. She said, 'Real listening is just watching what people can't bring themselves to say.'" Priya hadn't heard that before. She wrote it in the small blue notebook she kept on the kitchen table. She had kept a notebook since she was 9. There were 11 of them now, stacked in a box in her closet, filled with observations and questions and things she had learned from people who hadn't realized they were teaching her. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, thank you for letting me look at the folder." There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries more than words fit inside it. "Thank you for asking," Winston said. 3 weeks later, the Harmon Group signed. Not 40 million, 52 million, because in the second round of negotiations, Priya had identified a secondary interest Benson Lau's team had never explicitly stated: a distribution infrastructure gap in Caldwell's Mid-Atlantic portfolio that aligned precisely with a Southeast Asian logistics expansion the Harmon Group had been quietly seeking a domestic foothold for. She had connected those two facts, built a one-page proposal, and presented it to Stuart the morning before the final call. Stuart had looked at the one-page proposal. Then he had looked at Priya. "You built this overnight," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks," she said. "I just wrote it down last night." The final call lasted 38 minutes. When Benson Lau said yes, he said it in English, but he looked directly at Priya and added something in Mandarin before signing off. What he said translated as, "The best deals are made by people who understand what the other person is trying to protect." Priya answered him in Mandarin. She thanked him for his time and for his trust. Benson Lau smiled. The first one of the entire process. After the call, the conference room was loud in the way that rooms get when relief finally overrides professionalism. People who had been very tightly controlled for weeks suddenly remembered how to use their faces. Someone ordered food. Someone else said something that made Gerald laugh. Priya stood near the window. $52 million. Caldwell Financial would survive the quarter. 230 employees would still have jobs on Monday. The company would live. Stuart crossed the room to her. He didn't say nice work or good job or any of the other phrases that get handed out at moments like this, like napkins at a party. He extended his hand. She shook it. "You didn't just save a deal," he said. "You found an opportunity inside a problem that my team had been staring at for 6 months without seeing." Priya said, "I had fresh eyes." "You had the right eyes," Stuart said. "That's different." Maren Voss was standing near the door. She had been there for the last 10 minutes of the call, and now she was standing very still, watching Priya. And she had the expression of someone who has been holding a particular opinion for a very long time and is in the uncomfortable process of setting it down. She didn't say anything. She didn't walk over, but when Priya caught her eye on the way to the door, Maren gave a single deliberate nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something smaller and more honest than either of those things. It was acknowledgement. It said, "I see you now." Priya nodded back. Then she picked up the canvas tote and walked out. The Buds' home took 40 minutes. Priya sat in a window seat and watched the city pass. When she got home, her mother was in the kitchen. Nina O.C. Bonsu, 46, warm, a high school history teacher who graded papers at the kitchen table every night the same way Winston had once spread his folders there, looked up when the door opened. "How did it go?" Nina asked. "They signed," Priya said. Nina put down her red pen. She looked at her daughter. The green hoodie, the canvas tote, the worn sneakers, the same face she had known since the delivery room, and she stood up. She hugged her. Not the quick functional hug of someone moving on to the next thing. The real kind. The kind that presses an entire sentence into a person's shoulders. "Winston called," Nina said, still holding on. "He already knows." "Of course he does," Priya said. Nina pulled back and looked at her. There were no tears. Nina was not a person who cried easily, which Priya had inherited, but her eyes were bright in a way that meant the same thing tears would have. "Grandma Wei would have loved this," Nina said. Priya smiled. "I know." She went upstairs, sat on her bed, and opened the small blue notebook. She wrote down what Benson Lau had said in Mandarin. Then she wrote down what Winston had told her about her grandmother. Real listening is just watching what people can't bring themselves to say. She stared at it for a while. Then she wrote one more line underneath it, in her own words. "You don't need a title to understand what a room needs. You need to have been paying attention." She closed the notebook. She had 12 now. In the weeks that followed, things moved the way things move when a fixed point shifts. Caldwell Financial issued an internal announcement about the Harmon Group agreement. Stuart's note was careful and generous. It named Priya Ose Bonsu, described her contribution accurately, and used the phrase outside advisor without apology or qualification. Maren Voss read the announcement twice. She forwarded it to 2 people without comment. Gerald Fitch stopped by the front desk on his way out and asked the receptionist to make sure any future correspondence from Priya Ose Bonsu was flagged as priority. The junior associate who had said what's next, hire her for the board, said nothing in response to the announcement. He went back to his spreadsheet. 2 journalists called the company within a week. A business correspondent from a Philadelphia paper had heard something. Stuart's communications team drafted a response. Stuart read it, set it down, and told them to let him write his own. His version included a line that ran in the published piece. "Sometimes the person who can see the problem most clearly is the person nobody thought to ask." That line was read aloud at Jefferson Preparatory the following Thursday, in an assembly that Priya sat through in the 3rd row in the green hoodie, with the canvas tote on her lap, looking at the ceiling the way people do when they are trying not to react to something that is happening to them in public. Deanna, sitting 2 rows back, didn't say anything on the bus home that afternoon. She looked at Priya's sneakers once, the old habit, and then looked away and didn't look back. Winston heard about the newspaper article on a Thursday night. He was back home by then, sitting at the kitchen table where he always sat, folder open, reading glasses on, the same table where an 8-year-old had climbed up across from him and asked if she could look. Nina showed him the article on her phone. He read it slowly. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he took off his reading glasses and set them down on the folder. Nina was watching him. When she was 8, he said, not to Nina, not to anyone exactly. She picked up a contract addendum and asked me what ADR clause meant. I remember, Nisana said. I told her. I thought she'd lose interest in about 10 minutes. He looked at the table. She asked follow-up questions for the next 3 years. Nina put her hand on top of his. They sat like that in the kitchen, in the quiet of a Thursday night, the same table, the same light above it. Later, after Nina had gone upstairs, Winston sat alone for a little while. He picked up his phone and typed a message to his daughter. He typed and deleted it twice because the first 2 versions were too much. The third one was 4 words. You've always been ready. He sent it. He put the phone face down on the folder. Then he closed his eyes and let the kitchen be quiet. Priya read the message on the bus the next morning. She read it twice. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked out the window at the city, gray and early, and just beginning to open. She had an appointment with Stuart at 9. There was a new situation, a European pension fund, some complications around ESG disclosure requirements, and a cultural nuance in the way German institutional investors weighted long-term versus short-term risk. She had already started reading. There's something I want you to think about. Not tomorrow. Right now, before you move on to the next thing. There are Priyas in every building you walk into. They might be 17. They might be 50. They might be the person who makes your coffee, or carries your bags, or processes your paperwork, or sits behind a desk you've never looked up at. They are carrying knowledge that nobody thought to call knowledge because it didn't come with a certificate. They are carrying capability that nobody thought to test because the test would have required someone to first believe the capability was there. The research is clear on this. Skills developed outside of formal institutions, through family, through necessity, through years of paying attention because your survival or your family's survival depended on it, are systematically invisible to the people with the power to use them. Not because those skills are hard to see, because we stop looking before we get to them. Priya Osebansu didn't need a different education. She didn't need a better school, or a more prestigious internship, or someone important to hand her a credential and say, now you're allowed in. She needed one person to read a handwritten note and say, I'd like to meet. That was it. That was the whole door. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Not someday, today. Think of one person in your world who you've categorized. Not maliciously, just efficiently the way we all do it, because the brain needs shortcuts and we have so much to process. Someone you pass every day. Someone who exists in your peripheral vision. Someone you've filed under a label without meaning to. Now imagine you're wrong about them. Not just partially wrong, completely wrong, the way Stuart was wrong, the way Mandarin was wrong, the way the entire floor of Caldwell Financial was wrong, about a girl with worn sneakers and a canvas tote and 9 years of watching adults negotiate in rooms that weren't built for her. Imagine what's in the folder they've been carrying. Now ask, if this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me about a time someone underestimated what you were carrying, or a time you realized too late that you'd done it to someone else. Share this with one person who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this reason. Real stories about what gets seen and what gets missed, and the difference it makes when someone finally opens the door. The world doesn't owe anyone a stage. But the right question, asked by the right person at the right moment, can build one in 30 seconds. Priya Osebansu asked, "Can I look?" when she was 8 years old. The rest is just everything that followed.